I'm Deletna Dawalko, coming to you live from TMH Studios, presenting you your daily English news. The headlines today include WFP trucks are headed to Tigray but have been blocked by Afar forces. Tigray government calls for the unfettered humanitarian access through all the means, including airdrops. WHO official halts for Ethiopia's anti-Tigray speech, postpones probe election and decision as well. The government of Tigray calls for the international community to insist unfettered humanitarian access to be allowed into the region of Tigray. The government of Tigray made the call in a statement it issued today on a persistent obstruction of humanitarian aid by the Ethiopian federal government. According to the statement, the international community must insist on unfettered humanitarian access through all means, including airdropping, by deploying a robust package of punitive actions or the credible threat of one. The international community must make it clear the starving one's citizens into submission is not acceptable and the state conduct in the 21st century, the statement added. The statement also said the genocidal Abiy Ahmed regime continues to levy accusations against the government of Tigray, obstructing humanitarian aid that was meant for the people of Tigray without providing any ounce of evidence. Since the end of June 2021, Abiy's regime has imposed a devastating siege on Tigray, actively obstructing humanitarian aid and denying the entry of fuel as well as life-saving medical supplies, limiting the amount of operational cash available for aid agencies on the ground, expelling humanitarian officials that also refused to toe the line. The statement noted the UN and other international agencies have explicitly accused the Abiy Ahmed regime of imposing a de facto humanitarian blockade, and as the statement added, by contrast, none of these agencies has accused the government of Tigray of obstructing aid meant for its own people. The government of Tigray said Abiy Ahmed's regime's baseless assertion represents a poor attempt to preempt the usual barrage of international pressures that are brought to bear on the regime accused of seeking to starve its own citizens into submission. Pointing out that Abiy Ahmed's regime resorts to a different tactic recently, the statement noted that the regime, with the direct participation of the Eritrean forces as well as the Afar regional forces, would instigate a violent confrontation along the Afar-Tigray border in Addis Ababa and in Abala when the suspended humanitarian cargo movements on the ground of ongoing hostilities. What the regime would not want the world to notice is that the reason we have single viable route of humanitarian aid delivery, which is the Samara-Abala-Ma'ala road, is because it refuses to open additional humanitarian corridors, including airdrops as well. On the 23rd of January, the Ethiopian Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement in which the regime promised to allow additional humanitarian flights into Ma'ala to deliver much-needed aid and medical supplies. On the same day, a 27 truck belonging to the World Food Program that had departed Samara on its way to Ma'ala was forcibly turned back by the Afar regional government. To take at face value the claim that the Afar regional government acted on its own would only require the willful suspension of disbelief, the government of Tigray said in a statement, substantiating its claim by the obstruction of the humanitarian aid into Tigray during the previous 6 months. Having imposed a total blockade in Tigray region, the Abiy Ahmed regime is now doing its best to evade accountability for its siege and the starvation of Tigrayans, a war crime under international law, the statement stressed in what was released today. The Afar regional troops have been accused of blocking a convoy of trucks carrying humanitarian assistance into Tigray. This latest standoff comes amidst a serious shortage of food affecting millions of people in Tigray region. As this story comes from the Somali media Garau Online, Getachew Reda, member of the Tigray Armed Forces, said a 27-truck convoy was blocked by Afar troops under unclear circumstances despite official clearance by authorities in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian capital. Quote unquote, he claimed a 27 trucks WFP convoy apparently left Samara on its way to Tigray. The convoy was expected to break the log jam on the humanitarian access to Tigray, or so they were told. It turned out, while the government in Addis had ostensibly given the green light, the regional government of Afar, through the better of it, denied this act. Getachew Reda said the excuse given was the regional government didn't approve of this convoy and that there was fighting in Abala Afar currently. Getachew Reda also added that the most farcical part of this story is that the so-called Abala conflict was in fact launched by the Afar forces themselves and the Eritrean forces partnered a few days ago, which still continues. The Eritrean troops have been linked to the assaults within the Tigray region despite efforts by the international community to taint them otherwise for engineering a so-called genocide. The troops had not left some parts of Tigray despite their claim and made a huge return in December of 2021 after the Tigray armed forces withdrew from the regions of Afar and Amhara as well. The Tigray authorities now say that they need to allow the WFP trucks into access the region, noting that thousands of people could be dying should this situation within the north does not end and it continues to persist. People will die of starvation. Getachew indicated this move by the Afar regional government could not have been without the knowledge of the Ethiopian government. He goes to say, we desperately need aid for our people and are not interested in petty adventures. Unfortunately, the international community is too busy to notice, he added. As we move on to WHO, World Health Organization has postponed the decision to investigate its Director General's action on a request that came straight from Addis Ababa. The announcement was made at the WHO's week-long executive board meeting, which is set to discuss a bid by current Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus from Ethiopia's Tigray region for a second term as the head of the UN's health agency. WHO Executive Board Chair Patrick Amoth said that at the start of the hybrid meeting in Geneva that it would set aside a request from Ethiopia to investigate Tedros for allegedly supporting Tigrayan forces in fighting the Ethiopian government. None of the board's 34 members, which do not include Ethiopia, rejected this. However, Ethiopia's ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva, Zeneba Kabede Qorcho, later sought to deliver a virtual speech criticizing Tedros, but was twice prevented from doing so and eventually cut off after an awkward exchange. Amoth, again, who is the WHO Executive Board Chair from Kenya, which is one of the 28 countries that nominated Tedros for the second term of WHO chief, says further discussion of the matter is not germane and therefore out of under the relevant rules of current procedure. Tedros, who was backed by Ethiopia for the WHO job back in the 2017 election, said earlier this month that the aid was blocked from getting through Tigray, where the region's forces are fighting the central government currently. The Catholic Eparchy of Adigrat in Ethiopia has reiterated its urgent calls for dialogue and unhindered humanitarian access into Tigray. Father Abraha Hagos, director of the Adigrat Catholic Secretariat, said since December the church has been unable to deliver emergency aid to people because of war and the blockade imposed by the government. He said Adigrat, which covers the entire Tigray region, needs an urgent response to end the humanitarian crisis. He warned that millions of people, many of whom are displaced within the region, face starvation, while millions of others were exposed to severe malnutrition, especially children. Many have died already from diseases, including the current pandemic of the COVID-19. He stressed that it is a day-to-day reality to see people dying of starvation, as well as lack of medicine, and to treat preventable diseases as well. This shows any delay will definitely end the irreparable disaster on human lives, Hagos added. The church called on all its partners and other humanitarian aid organizations to continue urging as well as lobbying the international community, the United Nations, faith and the rights organizations, as well as diplomatic societies to push for political dialogue for peace as well as unlimited access to humanitarian aid. The UN says thousands of Eritrean refugees in Tigray are dying as access to aid remains blocked into the region. The United Nations Refugee Agency says thousands of Eritrean refugees in Ethiopia's embattled northern Tigray province are living under life-threatening conditions because they have no access to any humanitarian aid or even medicine. UN refugee staff members say that they were shocked by what they saw when they visited the Mai Ani and Adi Harush camps of Eritrean refugees in southern Tigray for the first time in 3 weeks. Intense fighting as well as security concerns have prevented them from going back and there until now. Boris Zherkov, who was a spokesperson for the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, says the team found refugees scarred and struggling to get enough to eat. He says that they lacked medicine and had little or to no access of water as well. The UNHCR says it wanted to relocate the more than 25,000 Eritrean refugees remaining in the 2 camps to a new site provided by the Ethiopian government in the neighboring Amhara region. The agency is also calling on all parties for a ceasefire and a guarantee of safe passage to allow the operations to go ahead and continue. Vice President of the Transitional Sovereignty Council, General Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, paid a 2-day official visit to Ethiopia. During his visit on the weekend, Vice President Mohammed, widely known as Hemeti, held discussions with the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. The meeting was also held at the headquarters of the Ethiopian Ministry of Defense on Saturday evening in the presence of the Chief General Staff of Ethiopia, Field Marshal Burhanu Jula, as well as Ethiopian Ministry of Defense Abraham Belai, the Sudanese ambassador in Addis Ababa, Jamal al-Sheikh, and a number of other officials from both sides as well. The vice president of the Sovereignty Council also held a meeting with the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki Mohamed. Relations between Khartoum and Addis Ababa deteriorating due to the territorial conflict over the dispute between the Al-Fashqa border region, where Ethiopian farmers cultivate fertile land claimed by Sudan. Sudan, along with Egypt, is also locked in a bitter dispute over Ethiopia's mega dam on the Blue Nile River. Our last main headline news for today: over 60 Oromo organizations have called for a credible as well as inclusive national dialogue neutral to convene. A total of 63 worldwide Oromo civic, professional, advocacy, human rights, community organizations today released a joint statement regarding the establishment of a national dialogue commission in Ethiopia and called for a careful sequencing to ensure a credible and all-inclusive national dialogue facilitated by a neutral party. According to the statement, recommends cessation of hostilities and comprehensive ceasefire between all armed groups in the country, and the government should be ensured before inclusive dialogue began, followed by the unconditional and unimpeded provision of humanitarian assistance to all regions needed, the release of all political detainees, as well as the withdrawal of foreign forces, especially the Eritrean scrutiny and the intelligence forces in Ethiopia, to happen. The statement called on all countries in the region and Ethiopia's bilateral partners to play a constructive role in ending the humanitarian siege as well as the ongoing civil war within the country. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Goodbye.